And so what I want to talk about is really how we can have the betrayer become a supporter and nurturer, and how that helps the betrayed or injured spouse heal.
Are you tired of learning how to heal from an affair, but not actually healing? Maybe you've gone to marriage counseling, but it hasn't gotten you anywhere. Or you've spent months struggling to heal and you're tired. If you're worried you might never be able to get through this on your own, then consider letting us help you. Go to healingbrokentrust.com and discover how working with Brad or a member of our team can make the difference you're craving. That's healingbrokentrust.com. But before we get started, Brad, let's give some context for the listeners. Why is it important to know about this number one secret to healing?
Well, I think the title of this podcast is self-explanatory. It's really the number one secret to healing.
Right.
If you can do it. Now, some couples, and a lot actually, probably 50% of couples listening to this are really going to struggle with this. But when it's there, it really accelerates the healing process. And when it's not there, we really get caught in the negative cycle. And frankly, there's a lot of issues that need to be resolved for people to be able to really implement this number one secret.
And if you are just joining with us or you just started listening at this episode, if you want to learn more about the negative cycles, go back to episode 3, download episode 3 and listen to the negative cycles. It's extremely important. It's another cornerstone episode to this whole process. So definitely check out episode 3. Is there anything else we want to talk about before we get started?
Yeah, I would just say you don't want to abuse this. This is a secret to healing. It's not something to use that you abuse your spouse with. You want to really try to be compassionate as you work through an affair. Obviously, people are hurting. Obviously, it's difficult. But this isn't licensed to abuse. And so I think you're going to enjoy it. And when you can implement it, things really take off. However, like I said a second ago, 50% of the couples, I would say, really aren't able to do this because they've got serious work they've got to do in their marriage. And even when they don't have serious work to do in their marriage, you really need to be working with a competent, trained professional working through an affair. But this is a really big part of the healing process. And so, without further ado, Morgan, you want to take it away?
Yep, let's get started. healingbrokentrust.com is where you can find the downloadables, the things that you can download to help you along this process. And so let's get started.
And I want to present a balanced view to this, because this can be taken in such an extreme that it's very, very, very unhealthy for a couple and for their marriage. Because ultimately what we're doing when we're recovering from an affair is we are dealing with trauma, and we're helping the marriage get back on track. We're not just helping one individual get back on track.
Right.
And so that's what we're working for. And so what I want to talk about is really how we can have the betrayer become a supporter and nurturer, and how that helps the betrayed or injured spouse heal. And there's a lot of things on the internet, there's a lot of therapists, there's a lot of different people who say after you have an affair, you lose your voice, you lose your opinions, you no longer have a right to have needs, and you got to be a doormat for this person right here.
That you have betrayed.
And that's obviously very short-sighted and very unhealthy, because it's not taking into consideration the factors that led up to the affair, and it's not taking into consideration, look, we're rebuilding more than just one person who's been broken. We're also rebuilding a marriage.
Right.
And so we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of people when they do this in a healthy way and when they do this in an unhealthy way. And we're going to talk about how this can really have a significant impact in helping a relationship recover from an affair. And then I also want to get into what does this mean when the betrayer refuses to be a nurturer and a supporter after an affair?
What that looks like.
What that looks like and what that could mean. And so, first of all, I want to say this: I have never had a couple, except for one, and I've worked with at least 200 couples through an affair. maybe 250, but at least 200 couples that I've worked with through an affair where if they followed this idea that we're talking about today, they recovered. They didn't fall back. They didn't backslide. They didn't divorce. They didn't separate. They didn't go downhill. They didn't just crash. Mm-hmm. And the idea is the one who has the affair becomes the supporter and the nurturer, and they're honest. They're going to help their spouse heal, and they're going to move forward as a couple. But when people are resistant and they are scared and they are still seeing the affair partner and they're dishonest, that really hinders their ability to recover.
And they don't trust the process. They're scared because they don't trust the process.
Yeah, they're scared because they don't trust the process. And I've had several people where just sharing this with them, look, you need to become a nurturer for them, a supporter for them, be honest with them about this. It's going to work. The odds are in your favor. And everybody I've worked with, except for one person, this hasn't worked with. And the one person that I shared this with, and everything I'm sharing with you guys today, this one person that it didn't work with was somebody that came in the first week of therapy. They discovered this in the first week. They came in that same week, and I met with them twice. And the first week, discussing different things with them, the wife just found out the husband was willing to stay and wanted to work on the marriage. The wife encouraged him to be honest. The wife didn't like the fact that he was honest with her, and that he actually had an affair with a woman, and he was in his 40s, and this was a woman in her early 20s. She thought that God was giving her a ministry to help betrayed women, and she was well off financially. They were both well off financially, so she didn't need him for his money. And so God had spoken to her and said, "You're going to go help other women. You've got a new ministry." So she took this and ran with it, and later called our office, right, and was very upset that she didn't give her marriage a chance to heal and to recover.
Instead, she just left and said that, this is my ministry. I'm not going to stay with my husband.
And of course, we encourage people after an affair to stay long enough to sort out what's going on,
right,
and come to a decision and a conclusion you can live with.
That's not based on a second emotion. All of a sudden, you just choose when you're in the worst part of the pain.
Yeah, and so that's the one exception to this. Everybody else has always worked, and I can say that confidently. That's my experience with this. When the person who has had the affair is honest, and they're willing to do whatever it takes, and they're a supporter and a nurturer, and they show their shame and they show their remorse, they've always made it. It's always worked, except for that one time, and that was in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And so, we want to present a balanced approach to this, because I'm saying you got to be honest. You've got to be, I don't want this to come across as one-sided. You got to be a nurturer. You got to be a supporter. This doesn't mean that you're losing your rights. This doesn't mean you're losing your voice.
Right.
This doesn't mean that you don't have a right to be hurt from things that may have led up to the affair. Mm-hmm. I have a couple that I've worked with where, in this particular situation, the husband, he was the one betrayed, and before all this stuff happened, he was talking with his brother-in-law and had too much to drink, and starts talking about his wife, sharing some things about her, and then that's what led to her indiscretions. And because a wall went up, and she got really hurt by that. She felt really betrayed, even though it wasn't an affair. She got really hurt, and then
those boundaries came down.
And she was just very vulnerable and very broken, and had an affair with somebody that was already a friend. And she was really hurt by her husband. And so her becoming a nurturer and a healer and a supporter is obviously going to be more difficult than somebody who had a one-night stand, or who is a sex addict, or who, in other types of situations.
Right.
And so some of those factors are a consideration in this.
Right, very important.
But if you're able to do whatever it takes, if you're willing to do whatever it takes, if you're showing your shame and your remorse and your tears, and you are compassionate, and you're nurturing, and you're supporting, this is going to greatly aid you.
Right.
Obviously, there's some things that are there that may make it harder. I've had, and I want to share a balanced view, because I've had people who've gone to other therapists who were very bitter because they felt like they lost everything. They didn't have a voice. And usually, Morgan, those people were already on the fence about leaving anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want to come to counseling again because the therapist was going to say, you've got to do this, you got to do that. So they were being very vocal about it. And they were already, and in fact, most of those people, in fact, I would say about almost all of them that I can think of, and I've only had a handful of those, maybe 5 or 6, who I think all of them have already made up their mind that they were going to leave anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They were already still in contact with the affair partner, or they had already made up their mind that they wanted to leave.
But it sounds like a lot of therapists are justifying the abuse of the betrayer because of their indiscretion, instead of the balanced approach that both people have needs and wants. And obviously the betrayer is going to need to show remorse and a healthy level of shame for what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that they are going to deserve abuse because of what they've done.
Exactly, Morgan. That's a great way to look at it, and it's a great way to say that. And also, the negative cycle isn't necessarily always taken into consideration.
Correct, yeah.
And the negative cycle needs to be taken into consideration because we're rebuilding a marriage.
And we'll talk a lot about
And
that.
it's 2 people. It's not just one person who's there.
Right.
Who's a nurse, who's a doctor helping this person get better.
Resuscitating.
There needs, and here, this is important for our listeners, for you guys to understand this. There needs to be compassion on both sides of this.
Right.
Obviously, there's going to be a lot of hurt, a lot of shame, a lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of yelling, that kind of thing. A lot of that's normal, but there needs to be compassion. Fundamentally, you have to have compassion to heal from this.
Right.
And you need to express that. And the quicker you can work through the negative cycle that's causing the fighting and the arguing and the yelling and the bitterness and the resentment, the better you're going to be.
Right.
And so, because it'll help, because you're working on rebuilding the marriage. And so you need that.
Right.
And you need to be honest. You need the compassion, because it's a two-way street. There needs to be compassion on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But we also need the one who had the affair to become the supporter and the nurturer and be honest, so that their spouse can move forward in healing.
Absolutely.
And Morgan, let me share this before we move on. I had a couple one time, and I've shared this before, and what's really amazing about this is just how powerful what we're talking about today is,
Mm-hmm.
how much this really works. I had a couple I worked with in therapy for 3 months, maybe 4 months. They came in because the husband got caught in one affair. Turns out he had 9, and they went back from the time I think they were dating.
Gosh.
And so he got caught in this one affair. There's 8 other affairs. He did not want to open up
Mm-hmm.
and talk about this. Very little answers, very few.
Very short.
Very
right?
short. And he didn't really share a whole lot, and it kept his wife stuck. And finally, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm stuck. I'm not getting any better. I feel like I did when I first found out, or at least in the first few days I found out. I'm not, I feel like I'm living with a liar. And so she was done. He came into our office. I happened to be free. Met with him and talked with him. And he said, Brad, how much is too much? There's more here. There's at least, 6 or 7 others. Turns out there was 8. There's at least all these different girls. How much is too much? I've been worried about that the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him what I just mentioned a moment ago. I've never had anybody who didn't become a supporter, a nurturer, in a sense a healer, who didn't make it work.
So you've never had anyone who became that nurturer and supporter who didn't work, right? So
Yeah, they've always done that. That's
yeah.
been willing to do whatever it takes. That's been honest, and honesty is a huge part of becoming a nurturer and a supporter.
Right.
There's physical affection. I'm sorry, I'm ashamed, but also honesty is a huge part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared that with them, and she stayed.
Right.
They made it work.
They've worked
and
out. They're healing.
6. Yeah, I talked to her later that day, and she's like, "This guy is evil," because he told me, she found out everything, and it's really hard to understand why people can do things like that. And she was, this guy's evil. And a few months later, maybe 4 or 5 months later, maybe 6 months later, she's saying he's really an incredible man. He's really an incredible dad. He's a really incredible man. She began to see him differently.
Right.
And so, this isn't hopeless. You just have to trust this process. And so we're going to get into some of that.
Right.
I want to give characteristics of people who, and for lack of a better way of describing this, probably are what I would consider slow supporters, slow nurturers.
Where they kind of put a wrench in the process of healing. What they do,
these are people that make healing much slower.
They stunt the process.
Yeah, these are things that happens that makes this healing much slower or non-existent. And this is a way to sabotage your rebuilding process,
Gotcha.
your recovery process. First is they minimize the pain that their spouse is experiencing.
Okay, so
they don't quite understand the pain. They downplay it. You're crazy. You're nuts. You're overreacting.
And sometimes that's the shame that they feel.
That could
they
be
want
the shame.
The pain to stop, and they
that could be the shame, or it could be the shame. It could be some other things, but they downplay it, and it's not very caring. It's not very compassionate.
Right.
I just nailed your hand to the wall with this nail gun, and then I'm going to downplay the pain that you're in.
Oh, you must not be in that much pain.
This doesn't hurt that much.
I don't want to feel bad that I hurt you.
Yeah.
Basically.
And so it's really silly
Right.
when you think about it like that. But
And
they minimize the pain, and it slows down the healing process or makes it non-existent.
Right. And the second one is they focus on their own hurts, their own pain, their own concerns, and their own needs, rather than becoming a supporter and a nurturer. They're consumed with how they feel and what's happening for them, that they can't turn and look at the pain they're causing their spouse.
Yeah, and in fact, they're stuck in their own hurt.
Right.
And they're still bitter, maybe
Right.
even from things in the past.
Exactly.
There's also a lack of knowledge about the healing process.
Yeah.
That's why we do this, and that's why we've created this, so that people who are experiencing this, you will know how to recover from an affair. You will know the steps that are necessary. You will have a 360-degree view of everything you need to know and consider when working through an affair and how to heal.
Exactly. And the fourth one is there's a lack of knowledge about the trauma associated with the affair or affairs in general. There's a huge level of trauma, and that's why a lot of people say, well, one minute I feel rage, the next minute I feel sad, the next minute I feel fine, I feel, numb the next minute. And so there's these ups and downs of the trauma.
Yeah, and the obsessiveness and the need to talk about it, too.
Right, and to ask the same question over and over and over, because they process something a little bit differently the next time, or they fully understand something, one part of it, but they still have questions about the other part of it. And so it's very common.
Morgan, that's important, and that's actually a part of trauma recovery, is the need to go through the story. When your spouse is asking about questions and they ask the same question, it's not necessarily to catch you in a lie. It's so that they can wrap their mind around what happened and begin to heal.
Right.
And that's an important part of healing.
Absolutely.
There's also what keeps people stuck is sometimes the supporter, the betrayer, who needs to become that supporter and nurturer, what keeps them stuck from healing is that they're still in love with the affair partner. They still have feelings for the affair partner.
And that can really stunt the process.
And you need to listen to our what we produced on how to fall out of love with the affair partner. We've got information and what we produced on that, so you need to listen to that.
Absolutely. The betrayer who needs to become the supporter, they are still communicating secretly with the affair partner. Maybe they haven't cut off ties. Yeah,
and that can be two different things. You can still be communicating with them, and if you're communicating, obviously you're probably still in love with them. But you can still be in love with them even if you're not communicating with them.
Right, and you can not communicate even though you have those feelings because you want to be honest with your spouse. Yeah.
Another thing that really keeps people from healing from an affair, a marriage from moving forward, is the one who had the affair is not honest about the affair. And Morgan, this is important, and for our listeners, this is really important. If you had an affair, your spouse, in a sense, has this, they're hypervigilant. They have this internal lie detector that tells them when they're being lied to and when things don't quite add up.
Right. Some call that the intuition.
Yeah, they have this intuitive ability to know if things don't seem right, and they're naturally more skeptical, and so they're not easily trusting. So they tend to know when things aren't stacking up or being honest.
Right.
And so
if there's something more that you need to say,
Mm-hmm.
they have an idea. There's something missing that they kind of have a feeling about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the eighth one, they're still experiencing a very horrible negative cycle that we've talked about, and we will probably continue to talk about. There's fighting and just not
blaming, criticizing, demanding, and then avoiding, withdrawing, getting defensive.
Exactly.
We're not really sharing and connecting emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
but we're feeling stuck and we're getting caught in these rigid patterns of interaction. And honestly, we don't feel like we're cared for very much.
Right.
And obviously, having an affair is going to create some negative cycles, or maybe they're going to at least be
Escalated.
But letting these negatives, not getting help for the negative cycles, is one of the most dangerous things
Mm-hmm.
that couples can do after an affair.
Right.
Almost every couple has a negative cycle
Mm-hmm.
after an affair.
And
you
in
need to get
general.
help. Yeah, and you need to get help with it. And that's something else you can listen to, is what we talked about in negative cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I would add, and definitely there are others, things that make healing slow.
Mm-hmm.
It's really when the one who had the affair, one thing that can make healing harder and slower for the marriage to move forward is the one who had the affair is bitter about something in the past, about how they were treated before the affair. Like I mentioned earlier with the wife, before she had an affair, she was really betrayed by her husband in a different way.
Her confidence.
Her confidence was betrayed, really just shattered by him, because everybody in the family found out these less than favorable things about her that she really never discussed, and it just crushed her,
Right.
just destroyed her, and she started talking more to a friend that she had, and then the affair didn't happen, but maybe not even 6 months after that. Maybe, I think it was 2 or 3 months after that.
Wow.
And so it happened fairly quickly.
Right.
And so those are some things that are characteristics of someone who's not really supporting
Mm-hmm.
and nurturing.
It makes
And-
it slow. The process is
slow or non-existent.
significantly. Right.
Yeah. And then there are healthy characteristics, things that we have to have, and if we do have, that really make this I wouldn't say a seamless process, but a more productive process.
Right.
I think that's a better way to describe it. And one of those, the first I would say, is they take responsibility and ownership for their actions.
Right.
They're not minimizing what they did. They are taking ownership of it. I am responsible for this. I did this to you. I'm responsible. There's nothing worse than someone hurting you who doesn't take responsibility and who minimizes what they've contributed and how they did it and
Right.
blames you for it.
I did this to you. I did this to
Mm-hmm.
us. I did this to our relationship, and I'm sorry, and
Mm-hmm.
I am remorseful. The second one is they've ended the affair. They cut it off.
Yeah, they've ended the affair, and that's necessary.
Right.
The third is they provide emotional support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. The fourth is, if needed, they provide physical comfort. Sometimes people don't want to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they need it. So being physically available.
Yeah, and this is important. They're honest about everything. They're honest about the affair. They're honest about any contact that they have with the affair partner. If they have to work with them, they're transparent, they're open, and they're willing to be honest.
Absolutely.
And they come forward with it. They don't wait for their spouse to have to pry it out of them
or find it
or find it on their own. And
Right.
that's huge.
And the sixth one is they express healthy levels of shame, remorse, and guilt.
Yeah.
Healthy because it's productive. It's not turning inward and
Yeah, they
going into a depression.
Well, they express their shame, and I don't think you can't help but be depressed after you betrayed
Yeah,
somebody.
that's true.
In the
Right.
beginning of this.
Yeah.
But they express shame, remorse, guilt. They show their tears. In fact, Morgan, what helps somebody who's been injured from an affair heal is they see that their spouse is hurting for them.
Yeah, honestly hurting. Not crocodile tears, but real.
Yeah, honestly hurting.
Right.
And they also acknowledge that their spouse has a right to heal. They acknowledge that their spouse has a right to feel hurt.
Right.
And that's important.
Right. And they do whatever it takes to help them heal. Right.
Mm-hmm. They're proactive in the healing process. They've listened to things like us.
Mm-hmm.
They've read books, they've listened to our material, and they're proactive in the healing process. They know what to expect. They are there. It's almost like when you know you have a loved one who's going to be going in for cancer surgery.
You look them up.
You look up on WebMD, MayoClinic.com, and you go in and you look up what they're going to need and the kinds of support they're going to have, and you do that for them. You help them with that.
Exactly. And kind of in lieu of that, something that comes naturally then, they understand the healing process. They understand what it looks like. And then it's I think, much simpler for the person who has betrayed their partner to then, see what's happening in front of them instead of it just exploding and they don't understand why. They have a better understanding, right?
And they've been able, and this is the last thing I would say, and again, there are others that I'm not including, but another characteristic that really helps couples recover is when the betrayer has really been able to help the couple avoid fights and arguing. They're not getting defensive. They're staying present. They're staying there with their spouse when they have all these questions and concerns. And so that's important.
Right.
And then the last thing I want to go over, Morgan, before we're done today is, what it says about the betrayer when they refuse to be a nurturer and a supporter.
Oh, this is important.
And this is really important because there's some factors here, and I only have a handful of these, maybe about 6 or 7 ideas on why a betrayer would refuse to be a nurturer and supporter. And the first is really they're afraid. They are afraid that the process of healing won't work, and they don't believe that being honest will have a positive impact on their ability to recover. They're really afraid that in their own potential, it's like they don't believe in them that they can work through this.
Right, or the potential of the relationship even. The second one is they don't think it'll work, right? Other people have divorced. Most people divorce, which is not true after infidelity, so they just have these ideas that society puts in their head that it's not possible, but that's a complete false belief. You can recover after an affair, but people don't think that they will.
Yeah, they've seen other people who maybe haven't.
Right.
But that's not the case. You're right about that. Most of them do recover. This is also important, and this is huge, Morgan. Another reason why people refuse to become a healer or nurturer or supporter is they are uncertain if they want to stay with their spouse. And I would say that's probably the biggest that I've seen, is they refuse, or excuse me, they don't refuse, but they're uncertain if they want to stay with their spouse.
For so many reasons. There's different reasons.
Yeah, and that goes in with the next one is they're still involved with the affair partner.
Yep.
And, and another part of this is they may not be honest because there's more to the story, and they want to protect their spouse from more hurtful info, just like the guy I mentioned earlier. He's not honest because there's more to it.
Right. They don't want to see them hurt anymore, and that's very difficult, but it's very important. So the next one is they don't believe their spouse will forgive them. They may feel beyond forgiveness because of the things from the past and what's happened.
Yeah, Morgan, and let me say this briefly. They don't believe that their spouse will forgive them because of things from the past that have happened, because of past times their spouse didn't forgive them.
Right.
And that's important.
How can this be any different?
Yeah, well, you're still nagging me about something that happened, from 20 years ago or 5 years ago. So how can you? And that's not even the same league as this. It's me betraying you. Right. So how are you tell me you can forgive me now? How can I trust that?
Right.
And then the other thing is
this is important. I think this is one's important.
And this is really important. They want upfront guarantees without putting in any work after the affair that things will be different.
Right.
They want to know upfront. Okay, this marriage beforehand has left me hurt and bitter, so I had an affair. Now if I'm going to make this work with you and move forward with you, I need to know up front that this is going to work. And that's part of that fear. That's part of...
And it's kind of like your friend comes up to you and says, I need a favor, but I need you to say yes before I tell you what this favor is. It's kind of like that. You're like, I don't think I want to say yes. I don't know what the favor is.
Yeah.
You want my firstborn child? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But they want upfront guarantees that, we're going to be happy.
Right.
And they will be, but you got to go through the process.
Right.
It's like, I want to lose weight, but I got to go to the gym. I got to eat right. I got to go through the same process everybody else does.
Right.
There's no shortcuts, but here's the thing. There needs to be a balance to this. This person who had the affair isn't a slave. They are a supporter, a nurturer, and as a result of that, they're helping the injured spouse heal. They don't lose their voice or opinions. They just recognize my spouse is hurting, and I need to be there for them. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they can't have needs too. In fact, we want them to have needs that can be vocalized.
Right, because that's healthy. It's a healthy pattern.
And there needs to be compassion from both sides to make this work. Mm-hmm. That's the key thing. There needs to be compassion from both sides to make this work.
Right.
And it definitely helps when the person who had the affair is willing to do whatever it takes and they're honest about it.
Right.
Trust the process. It'll work for you. It's worked for countless others. From my experience, less than 1% who are honest don't make it.
Right.
Being honest actually hurt them. Less than 1%. The odds are in your favor. Be honest about things and trust the process. You guys are going to make it through this.
Right.
And so you can do it. I believe in you.
Absolutely.
I believe in this process as well.
Right.
That we're talking about.
Right. And we've helped hundreds of couples.
Oh, yeah.
We're so glad that you've joined us today. Have a wonderful day, and we'll be talking to you soon. Hey, one more thing. If you want to break free from the affair once and for all, go to healingbrokentrust.com for personalized help or a self-paced online program. That's healingbrokentrust.com.